Kanayo, thank you so much for spending time to talk to us. We can cover so many areas with you. So maybe we should start first of all by just very briefly taking stock of where we are with the Intra-Africa Trade Initiative that you championed. We've come a long way.
Yes.
Later this year, we're hosting another IATF.
Yes.
What in your view is perhaps significant as we reflect on where we are now with that?
Like you said, there's so much to talk about. I don't even know how to start. But if I reflect on President Orama's address at his investiture in 2015, where he said intra-African trade will be the cornerstone of his legacy, in a sense. I mean, not those exact words, and how far we've come. It is even difficult to pinpoint where the several impactful things that we've done. Remember, at that time, there was no script. There was no intra-African trade, which is why we called it an initiative.
Right.
It wasn't a department, it wasn't there, but it was because we recognized that financing alone is not the problem that we need to tackle, but that there were other non-financing issues that will also require tackling. And also we recognize that the huge opportunities that at that time were latent, but were significant. So today, I will speak to a couple of things. The fact that in the first 5 years of his administration, we disbursed $20 billion for intra-African trade. From what seemed, and at that time, in that first 5 years, it crossed the 30% mark of the size of intra-African trade versus our portfolio. Right. At the time I took up the mantle, intra-African trade was done ad hocly, and it was only 3% of our portfolio. But if we did 5 years, it's over 35% of our portfolio. And the job is not done. We disbursed $20 billion and are well on our way to disburse another $20 billion, doubling it, by next year, which is the end of the strategic plan 2026. That's in the midst of that, we introduced a number of initiatives. On the financing side, we introduced what we call the Intra-African Trade Champions program, where we not only finance what we term Intra-African Trade Champions, African-owned multinationals. We wanted to help raise them to become on an equal footing as other multinationals, to compete for projects, compete for award of trade contracts, award of industrial contracts, and award of infrastructure contracts. And today, I would say that we have supported the twinning, which is the matchmaking. Because remember, intra-African trade is low. You almost have to make the markets by matchmaking. You bring in an importer together with an exporter, or a buyer together with a seller, or an investment together with an investment opportunity. And in that area, we've probably done about, for names like El Swedi, one of our intra-African trade champions, we've helped twin, probably over $7 billion in twinning alone, matchmaking, and expose them to about 20 countries in Africa where they've won contracts. I can also talk about Dangote, which is another intra-African trade champion, where we supported, his programs around the continent, but obviously the flagship one will be the refinery complex and the petrochemical complex.
Which is revolutionizing Nigeria.
It's revolutionary. Because we were very clear that you can't talk about intra-African trade without talking about industrialization.
Indeed.
The two have to go together. You have to industrialize to sell amongst yourselves. You have to expand your value chain. So, And at the time we started the Intra-African trade journey, the AfCFTA had not come into force. When it did come into force in 2019, we backed it wholehearted because we saw that this was the opportunity. And 10 years down the line, you can see where we are in the geopolitics, in the tariff wars, that we don't have any other solution but to look inwards and to support the AfCFTA, supporting the conception of the AfCFTA, supporting its coming to force, supporting it with initiatives is also another achievement. Think about the Pan-African Payments and Settlement System. Think about the AfCFTA Adjustment Fund. Think about the African Export Trading Company Initiative that has helped the emergence of what we call the African Trade and Distribution Company that we're now championing. So that even goods that think about our industrial parks initiative, where we have already 5 industrial parks that are operational, working with associate company, Arise, IIP. But also think about the fact that goods in those industrial parks can actually be traded. Industrial parks that are traded, the ATDCs, the ETC companies can actually help distribute and handle the logistics. They can do so for the industrial parks, but they can do so for smallholder processors, smallholder farmers, aggregate their goods and help do the exports.
Indeed, as we both pointed out, so much we can cover. But you mentioned opportunities. AfCFTA obviously is unearthing new ones. But one that I think is clearly outstanding to me over the last 5 years is what you've done with CANEX. And maybe we can just speak very briefly on that, because the theme of this year's annual meeting is really looking at building on the past into the future.
Yes.
So what can we anticipate in the future with what we've done with CANEX? What's the potential that we're unearthing now?
The CANEX and the Diaspora initiatives.
Right.
Where they, came in the second half of the strategy that I talked about. The first 5 years, the second 5 years of President Obama's regime. And we realized that at some point, we needed to deal with the issues of helping our young people harness their talents, take advantage of the opportunities that the Youth Bulge presented, and take advantage of the opportunities that the immense talent on our continent presented. Right. And that's why we decided to develop programs around it. And also we are proud of some of the accomplishments today in the creative event. What we've done in the fashion sector. Before I came here, I came from Paris, where we opened a pop-up shop in Galerie Lafayette for 4 African designers from Nigeria, Ghana, Kenya, and Morocco. For the first time ever in the summer period, so that we can expose them to brands. We can expose them to buyers. We can give them exposure that they will sell their products abroad. But that's not even all. For a number of years now, we're supporting them in Portugal runway, fashion show, Paris, New York, and Tokyo, whereby they're able to expose their designers, are able to expose their brands and get orders as well. Music, you probably know about some of the work we've done, not just in capacity building, but in the Afro-Caribbean fusion.
Right.
With Olodo, Oskido, Flavor, and a host of other musicians in the collaboration. What about, we started with publishing as well as literature, where we also launched a prize for publishing. We've done a film, where we've also, supported the production of films, aside from the fact that we also launched a $1 billion, that's FEDA, $1 billion film fund. We also created CANEX Creations Incorporated, a company, an intellectual property company that will help us house Africa's IPs and that we can use to monetize them. Rather than, again, what are we trying to do? To stem exploitation of African IPs. People give them what I would call peanuts, and take the IPs. No, we will give the money, but hold them in trust for them. And then in sports, we've also done quite a bit in sports, supporting the arenas that have been built. Kufuor Boani, we supported the upgrade of Kufuor Boani Stadium for AFCON, that held last year. We've done a number of also arenas. And even in the Caribbean, I was going to talk about our foray into the Caribbean, which are all
different. Another big story altogether.
Yeah, because we define intra-African trade as trade between and amongst African countries, but also trade between Africa and its citizens in the diaspora, wherever they are.
Right.
And that led us to,
because of the common area,
to the diaspora. And we started with the CARICOM community, do this structured in an organized manner. And then, of course, we have our first branch in Barbados, and we'll be supporting them with financing. As I was talking about sports, I wanted to tell you that we also supported the upgrade of the cricket stadium in Barbados in readiness for their World Cup last year. We supported them with financing. We support them with climate adaptation financing as well in St. Lucia. We've done financial services in Bahamas. And, and we're spreading it across because of what we believe are shared characteristics and our shared future. So in those areas, of course, we intend to build on goals, because they've really brought in tangible benefits, not just for the bank, but also for the peoples where we have deployed these interventions.
I'm sure we can continue.
But I have to talk about the trade fair.
All right, so let's, if you can, very briefly just...
I'll talk about two things. The Africa Caribbean Trade and Investment Forum. That's holding, this is in its fourth edition. In July 28th, 29th, it will be holding in Grenada. And what we've tried to do is to support trade and investment exchange, but also create cultural and tourism exchange within Africa and the Caribbean. So that fourth one we're holding in Grenada, 28th and 29th of July.
Forward to it. We're looking forward to it.
Yes. And the Intra-African Trade Fair. That will go down in history as also one of the biggest achievements of that initiative. And I have to tell you, at the time that we included it in our strategy as something we must do and implement to deal with issues of lack of access to trade and market information. There are people, countries don't know what their neighbors are buying or selling. You know, people will go to faraway lands to buy. Kenyans will go to faraway to buy the
Things
kind
that are all here.
that are in Burundi. You know, things like that. We all had all those statistics. And we said, okay, we have to have a platform, amongst others, to be able to bring in physical exchange of information so that people can see and we try to reorder.
If we can just speak briefly to that, because I think clearly when we speak of IATF, we're talking about the physical event, but there's also a virtual
events
connection,
Yes.
which I think many people don't appreciate. Maybe you can speak briefly to
So there is a physical event that happens at a place and a point in time over, every 2 years, right? And over 7 days, 7 full days, right? But there's also a virtual. But the virtual goes on even after the physical, but it mimics the trade fair. It has all the features and all the verticals, of the physical trade fair, and it continues. So people can have booths and continue the exchange, continue to deal making, even after the physical trade fair is no more, has ended. And that's it for the, we've seen a lot of successes there. We've seen a lot of deals done. We've seen a lot of investments that have crystallized by virtue of the platform. And I think it's the biggest platform in the continent today, for public and private sector dialogue. Remember, it's not just a trade fair. It's an investment forum, but it's also a seminar. There's also a lot of policy dialogues to be able to deal with issues, for instance, of standards, of packaging, of things that affect intra-African trade. You bring them all together in the room and we say how to, and that's how come in some of those events, for instance, that's how come we're talking about an intellectual property office, at this kind of events where, working with the public sector, regulators, and private sector, they come together to say, how do we then, we have our faith in our hands, as we say. It has to be Africa for Africans. And
Nice. Indeed. I think if there's anything that goes down with the legacy of Afreximbank, it's really driving that narrative of Africa for Africa.
Yes.
I think clearly with all that Afreximbank has been able to do over this, particularly the last 10 years, as you mentioned, I think there's such a strong foundation for Africa to stand on, to learn from what we've been able to achieve.
Yeah.
Let's talk about all that happened, for example, during the pandemic and how Africa was able to rise and help itself.
Yes.
So it's such an interesting story that continues from now.
And if I may, and you also have to put it in a context. I think everything we do comes together. So even as I talk about the trade fair, dealing with issues around trade and market information, I can also talk about other things, the digital products, other than the virtual trade fair, that we also deployed to deal with the issue of trade, like our trader platform, which is a market intelligence platform that helps, it's like provide information on African goods, African services, your counterparties, regulations.
Platforms like Mansell's.
And platforms like Equity KYC repository, So we're trying in the area of resilience, right? And I remember one of the speakers today said, it shouldn't just be aspiration, it should be institutionalized.
Right.
And we've also worked with some great partners in delivery of this. Some of our initiatives, if I think about the trade fair, where we work with both the African Union Commission and the AfCFTA Secretariat, to give it the gravitas that it requires.
Well, thank you so much. I'm taking a lot of your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you.